Hey folks, Jeremy Klein with you from OutdoorsNB. Paddle Canada Sea Kayak instructor, executive director of the West Isle Sea Kayak Symposium, pro staff for Old Town, Kokatat, and Pacific Yak angler, and also an angler myself in the Hook and Paddle series here in Canada. For a link to all of those great manufacturers and organizations, see the description of the video below. I'd like to thank you for your interest in this video. If you want to see more content along these lines, let us know in the comments below. And what would help us tremendously on the channel is if you subscribed, if again, you like what you're seeing, and hit that bell button so that you get notifications when we have new content. So we keep the OutdoorsNB channel basically geared towards primarily the skills and the gear related to paddling and some outdoor gear. To see a lot of the stuff in action, especially separating that from hunting and fishing and that sort of thing, I've created a second page called Maritimer Outdoors. And there you'll also see me messing around with chainsaws, tractors, and just videos of me messing around outside in the wilderness in general. A lot of hunting content there as well. So if you're interested in that, check it out. There'll be a link in the description below as well. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. I created this Tides in the Bay of Fundy video as a precursor to kind of explain how the Old Sat Whirlpool works, and that's a separate video. I wanted to kind of separate the two because they're both fairly in-depth topics. So if you haven't watched that yet, it's a great follow-up video after this one. And if you have, then this kind of explains how the tides get to the area around your island to create that world's second largest natural whirlpool. Let's dive into it. And thanks for watching. Tides occur primarily by the gravitational pull from the sun and the moon on the water on the surface of the earth. And tides essentially pass us at one given point in the form of waves and troughs. And for most areas on earth, there are two of each in 24 hours, a high wave and a low trough. The tide has two axes in essence. It has a vertical component and a horizontal component. On the vertical, it rises to high tide and it falls to low tide. And on the horizontal, as the tide rises in a fixed position, it also moves past that position. As it rises in a bay, for example, the tidal current will physically move into the bay. The inward rush of water is called flood tide, and the outward current is called ebb tide. So what causes this? Well, as the earth rotates, the sun and the moon hold the tidal wave in place, in alignment with the gravitational pull of those celestial bodies. Big mass has more gravitational pull, and the closer the mass, the more the pull. When the sun and the moon align to the center of the earth, the tides are highest. We call those springs. When the sun and the moon are at 90 degrees to each other in reference to the earth, the tidal differential or the pull will be the lowest, and we call those neaps. The moon's orbit doesn't stay at the same distance from the earth. It follows an ellipse or an elliptical pattern. So when the earth, the sun, and the moon align and the moon is at its closest orbit, the tides have their greatest height differential. Volumetrically speaking, the tides operate on something called the rule of twelfths. The shape of the wave created by the pull primarily from the moon make a shape similar to that of a sine wave. For those of you that took any statistics classes, you'll be familiar with that shape. The shape corresponds to essentially volumetric blocks of water for each hour of inbound, called flood tide, or outbound, called ebb tide. The rule of twelfths states that by the end of the first hour of either the flood or the ebb, 1/12 of the total volume of water will pass by a fixed point. By the end of the second hour, an additional 2/12 will have passed, and by the end of the third, an additional 3/12 will have passed. So by the end of the fourth, we have 3/12 again. By the end of the fifth, 2/12, and by the end of the 6th hour, 1/12. And that concludes all 12 blocks of volume. The time is a rough representation, as the tides in most normal tidal areas, where they are semi-diurnal or twice daily, like the Bay of Fundy, they actually take 6 hours and 12.5 minutes to occur. It takes 24 hours for the Earth to spin on its axis. So what's with the 12.5 minutes, you ask? Remember, the Earth isn't the only thing that's spinning. The moon also is spinning, and it spins around the Earth once every 27 days. So by the time we spin around once, the moon has advanced its position relative to us by 1/27th of an entire rotation around the Earth. This adds the 12.5 minutes to the time it takes for the wave to be pulled back past where we are. Tidal currents operate on something called the 50-90 rule. The 50-90 rule states that the speed at the end of each hour of the tide will be as follows. At the end of the first hour, the tidal current will flow 50% of its maximum velocity. By the end of the second hour, the speed will have increased its flow to 90% of its maximum velocity. And by the end of the third hour, which is roughly the middle of the tidal time, it will be flowing at its maximum velocity for that particular tide. At the end of the fourth hour, it starts to slow down again. It's at 90%. At the end of the fifth hour, it's at 50%. And at the end of the sixth hour, we finish our inbound or outbound tidal cycle, and our current will be zero. And we call this slack tide. It's at this point that the direction will change from outbound to inbound, or vice versa, from inbound to outbound. Knowing when the tide will start to come in can help us plan our fishing day, as predatory fish will follow bait fish into areas with the tide. Fish like flounder will become more active from low water to high water, and harbor pollock will start becoming more active then as well. Fish like that in general are going to follow the nutrients, and the bait fish that follow the nutrients as the tide comes in. In brackish water, fish like pickerel will become more active, and perch as that tide starts to come into those tidal zones. Knowing when the current will be strongest will tell us when to play in areas for fun, like at standing tidal waves or in current lines. Knowing tide times can also help us avoid a lot of work if we need to paddle in the opposite direction than what the tide is headed, by planning our route to go with the tide. You can have a go with the flow tour or a go against the flow tour. Also, you can get a free car wash of your vehicle's interior with salt water if you park it near low water level as the tide is coming up. And FYI, that's not recommended. What this tidal information can also tell us is how much water will be in a given area on our CHS charts at a specific time, as the tidal forecast corresponds to something called chart datum. The height shown in the forecast gets added to the chart's depth if the forecasted level is positive, or subtracted from the depth on the chart if it's negative, like a hard spring tide. So where can we get this tidal information? Well, in Canada, one of the best places to get the information is tides.gc.ca on the web. The federal government maintains tidal forecasting services for Canadians on this website. And from there, you can select the closest tidal station to your location and fairly accurately determine the tidal times. Thanks for watching. If you like what you watched, please subscribe to our channel. We're working very hard to make meaningful content like this for you. Also, hit the bell button down in the corner to get live updates as we upload content. If there are paddling or outdoor related subjects you'd like us to cover, please contact us. We would love to cover them for you. And if you're looking for really cool outdoor and paddling related pictures, please check out our Instagram feed and subscribe there too if you like what you see. Thank you very much. Bye.